Carrie Olson walked into a 7-Eleven convenience store at 4 in the afternoon, unaware that surveillance cameras were recording her final known movements. The 29-year-old would never be seen alive again, and her body would turn up months later in a vacant lot 300 miles away. Carrie Elaine Olson spent December 28, 2013 with her family in Davenport, Iowa. The 29-year-old woman lived in the Quad Cities area, a region where Iowa and Illinois meet along the Mississippi River. Davenport sat on the Iowa side, while Rock Island, just across the river, belonged to Illinois. Carrie's life unfolded in this small geographic area where state lines blurred and communities connected across the water. Earlier that day, Carrie had been with her boyfriend Justin Mueller. The relationship was experiencing difficulties, and tension marked their interactions. At some point during December 28th, Carrie and Justin had an argument. The disagreement was serious enough that it would be remembered and documented later as part of the timeline of her final hours. After the argument, Carrie left Justin and made her way to other locations. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Carrie entered the 7-Eleven store located on 38th Street in Rock Island, Illinois. The store's surveillance system captured her presence inside the convenience store. The footage would later become a critical piece of evidence, marking one of the last confirmed sightings of Carrie in a public place. The cameras recorded her movements through the store, documenting her appearance and actions during what would prove to be one of her final stops. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next case we investigate. After leaving the 7-Eleven, Carrie's documented movements became less clear. What happened next would later be reconstructed through phone records, witness statements, and the claims of people who saw or spoke with her. One person who would claim to have seen Carrie after the 7-Eleven stop was Tim McVeigh, her ex-boyfriend who lived in Rock Island. Tim McVeigh was 40 years old and worked as a karaoke host in the area. He had been in a romantic relationship with Carrie previously, but they had broken up. Despite the end of their romantic involvement, McVeigh and Carrie remained in contact with each other. McVeigh would later tell investigators that Carrie came to his house after leaving the convenience store. According to his account, she stayed at his residence overnight. Carrie's phone remained active into the evening and early morning hours of December 29th. Cell phone records would later show that her device communicated with towers in the Rock Island area. The phone's activity indicated movement and use during the overnight hours, though the specific nature of that activity would require analysis by investigators. December 28th marked the last day that Carrie's family saw her in person. The afternoon visit with relatives would be the final time they would have face-to-face contact with her. After leaving her family and making her way to the 7-Eleven and then allegedly to McVeigh's residence, Carrie's whereabouts entered a period of uncertainty that her family would not immediately recognize. They did not know at the time that the ordinary afternoon visit would be their last interaction with her. The surveillance footage from the 7-Eleven captured Carrie at approximately 4 p.m., establishing a baseline for the timeline of her disappearance. The video showed her alive and moving through a public space, unaware that these recorded moments would later be analyzed frame by frame as investigators attempted to piece together what happened to her. By December 30, 2013, Carrie Olson's absence had become impossible to ignore. She failed to show up for work, an uncharacteristic behavior that immediately raised concerns among her employer and colleagues. When attempts to contact her went unanswered, her family grew alarmed. Carrie was not the type of person to simply disappear without explanation or to miss work without notification. Her family filed a missing person report with the Davenport Police Department. The report documented the last known sightings of Carrie and established an official timeline for investigators to follow. Family members explained that they had last seen her on December 28th, just 2 days earlier. Since that afternoon visit, no one had been able to reach her by phone or locate her at any of her usual places. Investigators began the standard protocol for missing person investigations. They attempted to contact Carrie's phone, but calls went unanswered. Text messages received no response. The silence was complete and unexplained. Detectives reached out to people in Carrie's life, asking when they had last seen or heard from her, and whether anyone knew of plans she might have made to leave the area. Tim McVeigh became a person of interest early in the investigation due to his relationship with Carrie. When questioned by police, McVeigh provided statements about his interactions with Carrie on December 28th and 29th. He told investigators that Carrie had come to his house after being at the 7-Eleven. According to his account, she stayed overnight at his residence. McVeigh claimed that Carrie left his house on the morning of December 29th, walking away on her own. However, McVeigh's statements contained inconsistencies that concerned investigators. Details about timing and specific events did not align perfectly across different tellings. When pressed for more information about exactly when Carrie left and where she might have gone, McVeigh's responses became less precise. The gaps and contradictions in his narrative made it difficult for detectives to establish a clear picture of what had actually occurred. Cell phone records provided additional information about Carrie's phone activity. Her device had communicated with cell towers in the Rock Island area during the evening of December 28th and into the early morning hours of December 29th. One location that drew investigator attention was Camden Park in Rock Island. Phone records indicated that Carrie's device had pinged off towers near the park at some point during the relevant time frame. Whether this meant Carrie herself was at the park or whether her phone was simply in that vicinity became a question that required further investigation. As days passed without contact from Carrie, her family launched a public campaign to find her. They created Facebook pages dedicated to locating the missing woman. Friends and community members shared posts across social media platforms, spreading Carrie's photo and information about her disappearance to wider audiences. The viral campaign reached thousands of people throughout the Quad Cities and beyond. Missing person websites picked up Carrie's information, adding her to databases that tracked individuals who had vanished under suspicious circumstances. The online presence kept her disappearance in public awareness and encouraged anyone with information to come forward. Family members gave interviews to local media outlets describing Carrie and pleading for anyone who might have seen her to contact authorities. Despite the extensive public awareness efforts and the ongoing police investigation, December turned into January with no sign of Carrie. Her phone remained silent. No financial transactions appeared on her bank accounts. She did not contact family or friends. The complete absence of any trace of her suggested something far more serious than a voluntary departure or temporary absence from her normal life. On Saturday evening, April 5, 2014, a landowner in Hastings, Minnesota, made a discovery that would end the months-long search for Carrie Olson. The property owner was checking a vacant lot near the rural area approximately 30 miles southeast of Minneapolis when they found human remains. The location was far removed from the Quad Cities area where Carrie had disappeared, sitting roughly 300 miles north of Davenport, Iowa. The Dakota County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. Deputies secured the area and began documenting what they had found. The body was unclothed, lying in the vacant lot under circumstances that immediately suggested foul play rather than natural death or accident. Investigators examined the immediate surroundings for any evidence that might indicate how the remains came to be in that location. Based on the condition of the body and environmental factors, investigators determined that the remains had been at the site for less than 36 hours. This assessment meant that whoever placed the body in the vacant lot had done so recently, likely within the previous day and a half. The relatively fresh deposit of remains indicated that the body had been stored or kept elsewhere for an extended period before being transported to the Hastings location. The distance between Hastings, Minnesota and the Quad Cities represented a significant geographic gap. Someone had transported the body across state lines and deposited it in a rural area far from where Carrie had last been seen. The choice of location raised questions about why the perpetrator had selected this specific site, and whether they had any connection to the Hastings area, or simply viewed it as a remote dumping ground. The Dakota County Sheriff's Department posted information about the discovery on their Facebook page, alerting the public that human remains had been found and that identification was pending. The announcement sparked immediate speculation among people following missing person cases in the region. Given the timeline and circumstances, many suspected the remains might belong to Carrie Olson, though official confirmation would require forensic analysis. The body was transported to the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's office in Minneapolis for autopsy and identification. Medical examiners conducted a thorough examination to determine the cause and manner of death, as well as to positively identify the deceased through available methods, including dental records and other identifying features. The medical examiner's office confirmed that the remains belonged to 29-year-old Carrie Olson of Davenport, Iowa. The identification brought the worst possible answer to her family, who had spent over 3 months hoping for her safe return. The confirmation transformed the missing person investigation into a homicide case, shifting the focus from locating Carrie to identifying and prosecuting whoever was responsible for her death. The medical examiner ruled Carrie's death a homicide, meaning that her death resulted from the intentional actions of another person, rather than from natural causes, accident, or suicide. However, the autopsy could not determine a specific cause of death. The examiner classified it as homicide by unspecified means, an unusual designation that indicated the evidence did not clearly show how Carrie had been killed. The condition of the body after months and the circumstances of its discovery made determining the exact method of death impossible. The ruling of homicide by unspecified means would become a significant factor in the investigation and eventual prosecution. Without a clear cause of death, investigators could not point to strangulation, blunt force trauma, stabbing, shooting, or any other specific method. They knew Carrie had been killed, but the forensic evidence did not reveal how the killing had been accomplished. The discovery in Hastings connected multiple jurisdictions to the investigation. Davenport police in Iowa had handled the missing person case. Dakota County Sheriff's Department in Minnesota had found the body. Rock Island police in Illinois had been investigating Tim McVeigh's statements and timeline. The interstate nature of the crime required coordination among law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Tim McVeigh was 40 years old when Carrie Olson disappeared in late December 2013. He lived in Rock Island, Illinois, working as a karaoke host at local bars and entertainment venues throughout the Quad Cities area. The job suited his outgoing personality and provided income through hosting events where patrons sang popular songs in front of audiences. McVeigh was known in the local karaoke circuit, familiar to regular attendees at the venues where he worked. McVeigh was a divorced father of 2 children. His previous marriage had ended, and he maintained some level of involvement with his kids despite the separation from their mother. The divorce had been part of his recent history when he became romantically involved with Carrie Olson. Their relationship developed within the Quad Cities social scene where both moved through overlapping circles of friends and acquaintances. Carrie and Tim's romantic relationship had lasted for a period before ending sometime prior to her disappearance. The breakup stemmed partly from disagreements about children and family planning. Carrie wanted to have children of her own, a natural desire for a 29-year-old woman thinking about her future. McVeigh, already a father of 2 from his previous marriage, did not share her enthusiasm for having more children. The fundamental incompatibility regarding their visions for the future contributed to the end of their romantic relationship. Despite breaking up, Carrie and McVeigh remained in regular contact with each other. Their continued communication was extensive, with phone records later showing they spoke approximately 20 times per day on average. The frequency of contact between the former couple was unusual for people who had ended their romantic involvement. Whether their communication represented genuine friendship, lingering romantic feelings, or some other dynamic became a point of interest for investigators trying to understand their relationship. McVeigh described their post-breakup relationship as a close friendship. According to his account, they had successfully transitioned from romantic partners to friends who maintained regular contact and occasionally spent time together. The daily phone calls supported his characterization of an ongoing connection, though the nature and content of those conversations would later be examined as part of the investigation into Carrie's death. By the end of 2013, McVeigh's employment situation had changed. He was no longer working regularly as a karaoke host, leaving him without steady income during the weeks leading up to Carrie's disappearance. The loss of employment meant McVeigh spent more time at home and had less structured daily activity than when he had been working regular gigs at local venues. His financial situation became strained without the income from hosting events. McVeigh's home in Rock Island became a central location in the timeline of Carrie's disappearance. According to his own statements to police, Carrie came to his house on the evening of December 28 after being seen at the 7-Eleven convenience store. He claimed she stayed overnight at his residence, spending the night of December 28 into the morning of December 29 at his home. This made McVeigh potentially the last person to see Carrie alive, based on his account of events. The residence where McVeigh lived would later be examined by investigators looking for evidence related to Carrie's disappearance. The physical space where she had allegedly spent her last known hours became important to understanding what had happened to her. Details about the home's interior, including flooring, carpet, and other features, would be documented as part of the forensic investigation. McVeigh's account of Carrie leaving his house on the morning of December 29 placed him in the position of explaining her movements after the last confirmed surveillance footage. He told investigators that Carrie simply walked away from his home, departing on foot and heading in an unspecified direction. According to McVeigh, that was the last time he saw her. She left alive, and apparently of her own volition, walking away from his residence into the morning. The claims McVeigh made about Carrie's departure from his home would be tested against other evidence as the investigation progressed. His statement that she walked away created a narrative in which he was not responsible for whatever happened to her afterward. If Carrie left his home alive and under her own power, then her subsequent disappearance and death occurred somewhere else, involving someone else. The truth of that account would become central to determining McVeigh's involvement. McVeigh's relationship with Carrie, his presence as potentially the last person to see her, and his statements about her departure from his home made him a focal point of the investigation. Detectives examined his background, his daily activities, his financial situation, and his movements during the relevant time frame. Every aspect of his life during late December 2013 became subject to scrutiny as investigators worked to determine what had actually happened to Carrie. On December 29, 2013, the day after Carrie was last seen alive, Tim McVeigh engaged in activities that would later draw intense scrutiny from investigators. His actions during the hours following Carrie's alleged departure from his home raised immediate questions about his truthfulness and his potential involvement in her disappearance. McVeigh used Carrie's debit card to make purchases on December 29. The unauthorized use of her financial card occurred while Carrie herself was unreachable and had not been in contact with family or friends. Bank records documented multiple attempts to use the card, including several instances where incorrect PIN numbers were entered. The failed PIN attempts suggested that whoever was using the card did not know the proper access code and was trying different combinations to gain access to the account. One successful transaction involved a $20 purchase of gasoline. The gas station transaction was captured on surveillance cameras, providing visual documentation of who had used Carrie's card. The footage showed McVeigh at the pump using the debit card to fuel a vehicle. The surveillance evidence directly contradicted any claim that someone other than McVeigh had taken and used Carrie's card without his knowledge. Beyond the debit card usage, surveillance footage from December 29 captured McVeigh driving Carrie's vehicle. Multiple cameras at different locations recorded him behind the wheel of her car, moving through the Quad Cities area during the day. The video evidence established that McVeigh had possession of both Carrie's debit card and her vehicle on December 29, despite his claims that she had left his house on foot that morning. On December 30, McVeigh appeared at a karaoke venue where he had previously worked. Despite no longer having regular hosting gigs, he attended the event as a participant. During the evening, McVeigh selected and performed a particular song that would later be noted by investigators and prosecutors as potentially significant. The song he chose was titled "Used to Love Her," a track with lyrics about a man who kills his girlfriend and buries her body. McVeigh sang the song in front of the crowd at the karaoke venue, delivering the lyrics that described disposing of a former romantic partner. The song choice became a point of discussion during the investigation. Whether McVeigh selected the song deliberately as some form of confession or boast, whether it represented dark humor, or whether it was simply a coincidental choice without deeper meaning, became a matter of interpretation. Prosecutors would later argue that the selection demonstrated consciousness of guilt and a disturbing willingness to reference what he had done. Defense perspectives might characterize it as meaningless song selection at a karaoke event, where people routinely sang songs with violent or dark themes. Carrie's vehicle was found abandoned at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The vehicle had been left in the airport parking area, a location approximately 300 miles north of the Quad Cities. The vehicle's presence at the airport suggested an attempt to create the appearance that Carrie had traveled somewhere by plane, perhaps explaining her absence and lack of communication with family or friends. Investigators examined the car for evidence and documented when it had been left at the airport location. During the initial days of the investigation, McVeigh left the Quad Cities area and traveled to Las Vegas, Nevada with a friend. The trip occurred while Carrie was officially missing, and while her family was desperately searching for her. McVeigh's decision to leave town and take a recreational trip to Las Vegas during the exact time frame when his ex-girlfriend had vanished struck investigators as suspicious behavior inconsistent with someone who had no involvement in her disappearance. The Las Vegas trip would later become significant in multiple ways. McVeigh would claim the trip was planned in advance and had nothing to do with Carrie's disappearance. However, the timing of the journey, occurring immediately after Carrie went missing, and while investigators were trying to locate her, made the trip appear as potential flight or an attempt to establish distance from the investigation. The friend who accompanied McVeigh to Las Vegas would be interviewed by investigators about the trip, the circumstances surrounding it, and McVeigh's behavior and statements during their time in Nevada. Financial records showed how McVeigh funded the Las Vegas trip. Without regular employment income in late December, his ability to pay for travel, lodging, and entertainment in Las Vegas raised questions about his financial resources. Investigators examined whether the trip had been paid for using funds that might have come from Carrie or from the unauthorized use of her financial accounts. The combination of behaviors during late December painted a picture that concerned law enforcement. Using Carrie's debit card, driving her car, singing a song about killing a girlfriend, abandoning her vehicle at an airport, and immediately leaving town for Las Vegas, all formed a pattern of conduct that seemed inconsistent with McVeigh's claimed innocence. Each individual action might have an explanation, but the accumulation of suspicious activities during the precise time frame of Carrie's disappearance created a compelling narrative of guilty knowledge and involvement. Investigators compiled physical and digital evidence that connected Tim McVeigh to Carrie Olson's death. The forensic analysis of materials recovered from multiple locations provided scientific links between McVeigh's home and the body found in Hastings, Minnesota. Forensic examiners discovered carpet fibers in Carrie's hair when her body was examined. The fibers were analyzed and compared to carpet samples taken from McVeigh's residence in Rock Island. The comparison revealed that the fibers found in Carrie's hair matched the carpet in McVeigh's home. The presence of these matching fibers indicated that Carrie's body had been in contact with the flooring at McVeigh's residence at some point, supporting the theory that she had been killed there rather than at some other location. Cell phone forensics provided crucial timeline information. Investigators obtained records for both Carrie's phone and McVeigh's phone, examining call logs, text messages, and location data. The analysis revealed communication patterns between the two during the months leading up to Carrie's disappearance. The frequency and content of their exchanges helped establish the nature of their relationship and any tensions that existed between them. Text messages that had been deleted from phones were recovered through forensic examination. Digital forensic specialists used specialized software and techniques to retrieve messages that had been removed from devices. Some of these recovered messages contained content relevant to understanding the relationship dynamics and events surrounding December 28th and 29th. The deleted nature of certain messages raised questions about why someone had chosen to remove specific communications from their device. Investigators discovered that McVeigh had visited a local newspaper website repeatedly in the days following Carrie's body being found. Computer forensic analysis revealed that McVeigh accessed the Hastings newspaper website more than 43 times. The repeated visits to news coverage about the body discovered in Hastings suggested an intense interest in how the story was being reported and what information law enforcement was releasing to the public. Someone with no involvement in the death would have little reason to obsessively check a newspaper from a town 300 miles away unless they had specific knowledge connecting them to the discovery. Receipts and store surveillance provided additional evidence. Investigators found that McVeigh had purchased a large travel bag from a Big Lots store shortly before Carrie's disappearance. The bag was large enough to transport a body. When investigators attempted to locate the bag at McVeigh's residence or among his possessions, they could not find it. The bag's disappearance, combined with its size and the timing of its purchase, suggested it may have been used to transport Carrie's body and then disposed of to eliminate evidence. Timeline analysis created problems for McVeigh's account of events. He claimed Carrie left his house on foot on the morning of December 29th. However, surveillance footage showed him driving her car later that same day. If Carrie had walked away from his house, how did McVeigh come to possess her vehicle? The logical inconsistency suggested that McVeigh's story about her departure was false, and that he had access to her car because she never actually left his residence alive. Financial records documented McVeigh's economic situation in late December 2013. Without regular employment, he had limited legitimate income. The records showed purchases and transactions that raised questions about funding sources. The use of Carrie's debit card on December 29th demonstrated a willingness to access her financial resources without authorization. Phone records placed both Carrie's phone and McVeigh's phone in the Rock Island area during the overnight hours of December 28th into December 29th. The location data supported McVeigh's claim that Carrie was at his residence during those hours. However, the phone data also showed that Carrie's phone stopped communicating with cell towers at a specific time in the early morning hours of December 29th. The cessation of phone activity created a timestamp that prosecutors would argue represented approximately when Carrie was killed. Witness interviews provided context about McVeigh's behavior and statements. People who knew both Carrie and McVeigh were questioned about their relationship, their breakup, and their continued contact. Friends and acquaintances described the dynamic between them and whether they had observed any concerning behaviors or threatening statements from McVeigh toward Carrie. The evidence gathering extended across multiple jurisdictions and required coordination among law enforcement agencies in Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. Each piece of evidence needed to be properly collected, documented, and preserved according to legal standards that would allow it to be admitted in court proceedings. The forensic work, digital analysis, and traditional detective investigation combined to build a comprehensive case against McVeigh. Tim McVeigh's trial for the murder of Carrie Olson began in early June 2015 in Rock Island County, Illinois. The proceedings took an unusual format as McVeigh waived his right to a jury trial, opting instead for a bench trial. Judge Michael Mearsman would hear all evidence and testimony, then make the determination of guilt or innocence without input from a jury. The decision to proceed with a bench trial meant that one person, the judge, would evaluate the evidence and deliver a verdict rather than 12 citizens deliberating together. McVeigh faced 2 charges. The first charge was first-degree murder, alleging that he intentionally killed Carrie Olson. The second charge was concealment of a homicidal death, addressing the disposal and transportation of her body to Minnesota. Both charges carried significant prison time if convicted, with first-degree murder potentially resulting in decades behind bars. The trial spanned multiple weeks as prosecutors presented their case against McVeigh. The state bore the burden of proving beyond reasonable doubt that McVeigh had killed Carrie and then concealed her death by transporting and disposing of her body. Without a definitive cause of death from the medical examiner, prosecutors had to construct their case using circumstantial evidence, timeline analysis, forensic findings, and behavioral evidence. Text message evidence formed a significant component of the prosecution's case. Messages recovered from phones showed communications between Carrie and McVeigh from September 2013 through December 28, 2013. The texts revealed the nature of their relationship after their romantic breakup, demonstrating the frequency of their contact and the content of their conversations. Some messages indicated ongoing tensions or disagreements, while others showed a more friendly dynamic. Financial evidence detailed McVeigh's economic struggles in late 2013. Without regular employment from his karaoke hosting work, McVeigh faced money problems heading into the winter months. Prosecutors argued that financial stress created additional pressure in his life and may have contributed to tensions with Carrie. The unauthorized use of her debit card on December 29 demonstrated both his financial desperation and his willingness to exploit her resources. Justin Mueller testified about his relationship with Carrie and the argument they had on December 28. Mueller described the disagreement and confirmed that Carrie left him that afternoon. His testimony established Carrie's emotional state and activities earlier on the day she disappeared, providing context for understanding her movements and decisions during those final hours. Family members took the stand to testify about Carrie's character, her habits, and their last interactions with her on December 28. Their testimony painted a picture of a woman with established routines and strong family connections who would not have voluntarily disappeared without contacting loved ones. The family's testimony emphasized that Carrie's complete silence and failure to reach out was entirely inconsistent with her personality and behavior patterns. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence linking McVeigh's home to Carrie's body. Expert witnesses explained the carpet fiber analysis and how the fibers found in Carrie's hair matched samples from McVeigh's residence. The testimony established that Carrie's body had been at McVeigh's home, contradicting his claim that she simply walked away alive on the morning of December 29. Surveillance footage played a central role in the trial. Video from the 7-Eleven showed Carrie alive at 4 p.m. on December 28. Additional surveillance from December 29 showed McVeigh using Carrie's debit card and driving her vehicle. The visual evidence directly contradicted McVeigh's narrative that Carrie left his house on foot with her belongings. Cell phone forensic experts testified about the location data and activity on both Carrie's and McVeigh's phones. The testimony established that both phones were in the Rock Island area during the overnight hours of December 28 into December 29. Significantly, experts testified that Carrie's phone ceased all activity at approximately 6:15 a.m. on December 29. The sudden stop in phone activity created a timestamp that prosecutors argued represented when Carrie was killed. Computer forensic evidence showed McVeigh's 43 visits to the Hastings newspaper website after Carrie's body was discovered. Experts testified about the frequency and timing of these visits, demonstrating McVeigh's intense interest in news coverage of the body found 300 miles from his home. The obsessive monitoring of news from Hastings suggested guilty knowledge about why a body discovered in Minnesota would be relevant to him. The Las Vegas trip became a focus of testimony. Prosecutors presented evidence about the timing of the journey and argued it represented consciousness of guilt and an attempt to establish distance from the investigation. Defense perspectives on the trip characterized it as a previously planned vacation that coincidentally occurred during the search for Carrie. McVeigh's defense argued that the state had not proven beyond reasonable doubt that McVeigh killed Carrie. Defense attorneys pointed to the lack of a definitive cause of death, arguing that without knowing how Carrie died, the prosecution could not prove McVeigh had killed her. They challenged the strength of the circumstantial evidence and offered alternative explanations for various pieces of evidence presented by the state. Closing arguments concluded on July 14, 2015. Both sides summarized their positions and urged Judge Mearsman to reach a verdict consistent with the evidence. The judge then took the case under advisement to review all testimony and evidence before rendering his decision. On Friday afternoon, July 17, 2015, Judge Michael Mearsman announced his verdict in the trial of Tim McVeigh. The courtroom filled with family members, media representatives, and others who had followed the case since Carrie Olson's disappearance 18 months earlier. McVeigh stood before the judge to hear the decision that would determine the rest of his life. Judge Mearsman found Tim McVeigh guilty of first-degree murder. The judge determined that the evidence proved beyond reasonable doubt that McVeigh had intentionally killed Carrie Olson. Despite the lack of a definitive cause of death from the medical examiner, the judge concluded that the circumstantial evidence, timeline, forensic findings, and behavioral evidence collectively established McVeigh's guilt. The judge also found McVeigh guilty on the second charge of concealment of a homicidal death. The evidence demonstrated that McVeigh had transported Carrie's body from Illinois to Minnesota and disposed of it in the vacant lot near Hastings. The conviction on both charges meant McVeigh would face substantial prison time when sentencing occurred. During the verdict proceedings, Judge Mearsman addressed McVeigh directly. The judge made comments about McVeigh's behavior and his answers to questions during the investigation. Mearsman stated that the only way the evidence did not point to McVeigh's guilt would be if everyone except McVeigh was lying. The judge found the cumulative weight of evidence too compelling to support any conclusion other than guilty. Judge Mearsman made a particularly pointed remark to McVeigh during the proceedings. The judge stated that he did not know exactly how McVeigh had killed Carrie, but the evidence proved that he had done that. The statement acknowledged the unusual aspect of the conviction, where guilt was established despite the medical examiner being unable to specify the precise method of death. The judge's comment reflected confidence that the totality of evidence overcame the absence of that specific detail. The verdict included the judge's determination about when and where Carrie died. Based on the evidence presented at trial, Judge Mearsman concluded that Carrie was killed at McVeigh's residence in Rock Island between the hours of 4 a.m. and 6:15 a.m. on December 29, 2013. The time frame corresponded with the period when both phones were at McVeigh's home and ended when Carrie's phone ceased all activity at 6:15 a.m. The ruling that Carrie died at McVeigh's home directly contradicted his statement to police that she walked away alive on the morning of December 29. The judge's finding meant that McVeigh's account of events was false and that Carrie never left his residence after arriving there on December 28. Whatever happened to her occurred inside his home during those early morning hours. The guilty verdict on first-degree murder indicated the judge found evidence of intent and willfulness in the killing. First-degree murder required proof that the death was not accidental or the result of a sudden heat of passion, but rather an intentional act. The judge determined that the evidence supported this higher level of culpability, rather than a lesser charge like second-degree murder or manslaughter. McVeigh's reaction to the verdict was observed by those present in the courtroom. The guilty finding meant he would remain in custody pending sentencing and face decades in prison when sentencing occurred. His defense team would have the opportunity to argue for a lower sentence within the statutory range, but the convictions on both charges established his legal responsibility for Carrie's death and the disposal of her body. The verdict brought a form of resolution to Carrie's family after 18 months of uncertainty and legal proceedings. While nothing could return Carrie to them, the guilty finding provided official acknowledgement that Tim McVeigh was responsible for her death. The family had lived through the initial disappearance, the discovery of her body, the investigation, and finally the trial. The verdict validated their belief that McVeigh had killed their daughter and sister. A sentencing date would be set for a future hearing, where Judge Mearsman would determine the specific prison term McVeigh would serve for the murder conviction and the concealment conviction. The range of possible sentences under Illinois law would guide the judge's decision, but the final determination would consider various factors, including the circumstances of the crime and any aggravating or mitigating elements. The sentencing hearing for Tim McVeigh took place on Friday, October 9, 2015, nearly 3 months after his conviction. The hearing provided an opportunity for Carrie Olson's family to address the court and for the judge to determine the prison term McVeigh would serve for killing Carrie and concealing her death. Victim impact statements formed a significant portion of the hearing. Multiple members of Carrie's family spoke directly to the court about how her murder had affected their lives. The statements described the pain of losing Carrie, the months of uncertainty before her body was found, and the ongoing grief that would never fully heal. Family members addressed both the judge and McVeigh, making clear the extent of the loss they had suffered. Carrie Olson, Carrie's mother, delivered testimony that detailed the anguish of losing her daughter. She spoke about Carrie as a person, describing her personality, her dreams, and the future that had been stolen from her. Carrie's statement conveyed not just grief but also anger at the person responsible for taking Carrie's life. The mother's testimony represented the family's collective pain and their desire to see appropriate punishment imposed. The courtroom atmosphere was tense as family members confronted McVeigh through their statements. For many of them, the sentencing hearing represented their first opportunity to speak publicly about the impact of Carrie's death. They had waited through the investigation, the trial, and now the sentencing process to have their voices heard in an official setting. The statements made clear that Carrie's absence left a permanent void in their family. McVeigh was given an opportunity to address the court before sentencing. In his statement, McVeigh maintained his innocence despite the guilty verdict. He told the court that he did not kill Carrie. McVeigh's continued denial of responsibility, even after conviction, added another dimension to the proceedings. His refusal to accept culpability or express remorse stood in stark contrast to the pain expressed by Carrie's family members. Judge Michael Mearsman addressed the court before announcing the sentence. The judge made comments about the nature of the crime and McVeigh's conduct both during and after Carrie's death. Mearsman specifically referenced the Las Vegas trip, noting that while Carrie's family was desperately searching for their missing daughter, McVeigh was in Las Vegas gambling and enjoying himself. The judge characterized this behavior as particularly callous and indicative of someone with guilty knowledge who felt no compunction about recreating while a woman he claimed to care about was missing. The judge announced the sentence for the first-degree murder conviction. McVeigh received 40 years in prison for killing Carrie Olson. The lengthy term reflected the serious nature of taking another person's life and the aggravating circumstances surrounding the crime. 40 years represented a substantial portion of McVeigh's remaining life, ensuring he would spend decades behind bars for his actions. For the concealment of a homicidal death conviction, Judge Mearsman imposed an additional 5 years. The separate sentence addressed the distinct criminal act of transporting and disposing of Carrie's body in an attempt to hide the crime. The concealment charge recognized that beyond killing Carrie, McVeigh had taken deliberate steps to avoid detection and accountability by moving her body 300 miles away to Minnesota. The sentences would run consecutively rather than concurrently, meaning the 5-year term would begin after completion of the 40-year term. The consecutive structure resulted in a total sentence of 45 years in prison. McVeigh, who was 42 years old at the time of sentencing, would be in his late 80s before becoming eligible for release if he served the full sentence. Illinois law at the time required McVeigh to serve a substantial percentage of the sentence before becoming eligible for parole or early release. The actual time served would depend on various factors, including behavior while incarcerated and parole board decisions, but the 45-year sentence ensured a minimum of multiple decades behind bars. The sentencing concluded the criminal proceedings against McVeigh at the trial court level. He would be transferred to an Illinois Department of Corrections facility to begin serving his sentence. The conviction and sentence represented the legal system's response to Carrie's death, holding McVeigh accountable through the criminal justice process. Rock Island County State's Attorney John McGeehee spoke to media after the sentencing. McGeehee discussed the case and the outcome, emphasizing the thorough investigation and prosecution that led to McVeigh's conviction. The prosecutor noted the challenges of proving murder without a definitive cause of death, but expressed satisfaction that justice had been achieved for Carrie and her family. Carrie's parents, Karen and Dave Olson, stood with McGeehee during the media briefing. Their presence symbolized the family's involvement throughout the legal process and their relief that the court proceedings had finally concluded. While no sentence could bring Carrie back or fully address their loss, the 45-year prison term represented official accountability for the person responsible for their daughter's death. Tim McVeigh appealed his conviction and sentence to the Illinois Appellate Court. The appeal challenged various aspects of the trial court proceedings, arguing that errors had occurred that warranted either reversal of the conviction or reduction of the sentence. McVeigh's defense attorneys filed briefs outlining their legal arguments for why the guilty verdict should not stand. The appellate process took several years as the case moved through the higher court system. Appellate judges reviewed the trial record, examining testimony, evidence, and legal procedures to determine whether any reversible errors had occurred. The appeals court considered arguments about the sufficiency of evidence, the admissibility of certain testimony, and whether the trial had been conducted fairly. In August 2019, the Illinois Appellate Court issued its decision. The court upheld both McVeigh's conviction and his 45-year sentence. The appellate judges found no errors significant enough to warrant overturning the guilty verdict or modifying the prison term. The decision affirmed Judge Mearsman's conclusions and validated the trial court proceedings. The appellate ruling meant McVeigh's legal avenues for challenging the conviction through the state court system had been exhausted. McVeigh remains incarcerated at Menard Correctional Center in Illinois, serving his 45-year sentence. Despite the conviction, guilty verdict, and unsuccessful appeal, McVeigh continues to maintain his innocence. He has stated that he did not kill Carrie Olson and that he was wrongfully convicted. His persistent denial of responsibility stands in contrast to the legal system's determination of his guilt based on the evidence presented at trial. The question of exactly how Carrie died remains officially unresolved. The medical examiner's classification of homicide by unspecified means left a gap in the factual record that was never definitively filled. The condition of her body after months and the circumstances of its disposal prevented forensic experts from determining whether she was strangled, suffocated, struck, or killed through some other method. The absence of this specific detail makes the conviction unusual, as most murder cases involve clear evidence of how the victim died. The trial court's conclusion that Carrie was killed at McVeigh's home between 4 a.m. and 6:15 a.m. on December 29, 2013, provided a framework and location, but not a method. The judge's statement that he did not know how McVeigh did it, but that he did it, acknowledged this gap, while asserting that the cumulative evidence proved guilt despite the missing piece. The resolution of the legal proceedings provided Carrie's family with a measure of accountability. McVeigh was held legally responsible for her death through conviction and sentencing. The criminal justice system processed the case from initial investigation through trial, verdict, sentencing, and unsuccessful appeal. Each stage brought the family closer to official recognition that someone was being punished for taking Carrie's life. The investigation demonstrated the value of combining multiple types of evidence to build a criminal case. Cell phone forensics, surveillance footage, financial records, forensic fiber analysis, computer usage data, and behavioral evidence came together to create a comprehensive picture that convinced a judge of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. No single piece of evidence was definitive, but the accumulation of circumstantial evidence formed a compelling narrative. The case also illustrated challenges that arise when a body is discovered months after death and after being stored in unknown conditions before disposal. The inability to determine cause of death created legal and investigative complications that required prosecutors to rely more heavily on circumstantial evidence than they might have in cases where forensic pathology provides clear answers. Carrie Olson's life ended at age 29 at the hands of someone she knew and trusted. Her disappearance sparked an extensive search involving family, friends, law enforcement across multiple states, and widespread public attention through social media campaigns. The discovery of her body transformed a missing person investigation into a homicide prosecution. The legal proceedings that followed produced a conviction and lengthy prison sentence for Tim McVeigh, though the specific circumstances of how Carrie died remain unknown. The case stands as both a successful prosecution based on circumstantial evidence and a reminder that not all forensic questions receive definitive answers.